The first round of the 2025 NHL Draft is finally in the books after over 4.5 hours. I mean, holy shit, I feel like I say this every year, but that is just way too long. An event as important and as exciting as the NHL Draft shouldn't feel like a chore to sit through, and this year it kind of did. On top of how long it was, there really wasn't much excitement. There was so much talk coming into this year's draft about how crazy it could be in terms of big trades, and not a single player was traded during the draft. The only trades we saw happen were teams exchanging picks, moving up and moving down. There were obviously a couple of trades that happened throughout the day before the draft started, the Noah Dobson trade, and then the Charlie Coyle and Miles Wood trade to Columbus, which I haven't talked about on the channel yet, so stay tuned to the end of this video. I'll give you guys my thoughts on that deal. I think the whole decentralized thing was a complete miss as well. Let's hope the NHL never does this again and goes back to the old format. Let's get into these picks though. First overall, no surprise here, the New York Islanders selected a left shot defenseman from the Erie Otters, Matthew Schaefer, who has all the makings of being a franchise defenseman for the Islanders. No brainer of a pick here. Second overall, there was a lot of smoke surrounding San Jose in this second overall pick heading into the draft. There was some talk about them potentially looking to trade the pick for a young NHL ready player. There was also some talk about them potentially using the second overall selection on Anton Frondell. But in the end, I think San Jose made the right decision here, selecting Michael Misa, who, in my opinion, was the best player available at number 2. Just an insane offensive talent. He put up ridiculous numbers in the OHL this season. And man, what a luxury it's going to be for the San Jose Sharks, having a 1-2 punch down the middle of Macklin Celebrini and Michael Misa for the next 10 to 15 years. With the third overall pick, the Blackhawks decided to go with Anton Frondell. Not a huge surprise there. I think everybody expected the Blackhawks to go with Frondell if Misa went number 2 to San Jose, and that's what happened. Frondell had a very strong second half this season for Djurgården in the Allsvenskan, which led to him rocketing up the draft rankings. He's got a very well-rounded offensive game. I think Blackhawks fans should be pretty happy with this pick. Fourth overall, Utah went with Caleb Denoyer, who may not have the offensive upside as some of the other forwards that went in the top 10, but he very well may be the best defensive forward in the entire draft class. Sounds like he's got a pretty high floor. He did a lot of winning at the junior level. I wouldn't be surprised at all if Caleb Denoyer turns out to be the 2C of the future for Utah behind Logan Cooley. Fifth overall, the Predators elected to go with centerman Brady Martin, another player who really shot up the draft rankings over the last couple of months. Probably not a guy who's going to be explosive offensively at the NHL level, but he's got a well-rounded game, high energy, high compete, has a physical element to his game as well. One of the NHL comparables that I kept seeing people throw around for Brady Martin is Sam Bennett. Sixth overall, Philly went with Porter Martone. I'm a bit surprised they didn't go center here just because the organization kind of has a need for a true number 1 center, and there isn't really anyone in the prospect pool that projects to be that guy. That being said, I still really like this pick. I think when you're drafting this high, it's not always a great idea to draft for positional need, and it's smart to go with best player available. And I think at 6th overall, you can make the argument that Porter Martone was definitely the best player available. He's got the size, he's got the speed, he's got the skill. If he pans out, he could definitely be one of the premier power forwards in the NHL. 7th overall, James Hagens fell into the lap of the Boston Bruins, so the Islanders weren't able to package those 2 first-round picks together to move up and select Hagens. It kind of goes without saying, but I think this is a phenomenal pick by the Boston Bruins. There was a time where James Hagens was in the conversation for going first overall in this year's draft. He was a point-per-game player as a freshman for Boston College this year. He was very good in the World Juniors as well. Has the potential to be a future number 1 center at the NHL level, and if you ask me, that is exactly what the Boston Bruins need. 8th overall, Seattle elected to go with centerman Jake O'Brien, which surprised me a little bit. I really thought they would go with a defenseman here, but I guess you can never have too much depth at the center position, and now Seattle's organizational depth at center is pretty crazy with guys like Matty Beniers, Shane Wright, Berkeley Catton, and Jake O'Brien. 9th overall, we finally saw another defenseman taken as the Buffalo Sabres selected 6'6" right shot defenseman Radim Murtka. He came over to the WHL from the Czech League mid-season and transitioned pretty well. He finished the season with 35 points in 43 games for the Thunderbirds. Doesn't project to be a big-time point producer at the NHL level, but should be one hell of a a shutdown defenseman. A future top 4 of Dahlin, Kesselring, Power, and Mertka sounds pretty good and is absolutely massive. Speaking of massive, with the 10th overall pick, the Anaheim Ducks elected to go with centerman Roger McQueen. Obviously, there is some injury concern there, but with his combination of size and skill, I think he is well worth taking a chance on with the 10th overall pick. 11th overall, the Pittsburgh Penguins selected centerman Benjamin Kindle, which was a bit of a surprise. This is quite a bit higher than most mock drafts had him going. That being said, I don't think this is a bad pick. He is undersized, but the offensive skill is undeniable. He had 99 points in the WHL this season, and if there's one thing we know about Kyle Dubas based off of his draft history, he is not afraid to draft skilled, undersized players. Moving on now to the 12th overall pick, a pick that Philadelphia actually traded up for. They selected centerman Jack Nesbitt out of the OHL. Finished just under a point per game this season for Windsor with 64 in 65 games. He's a big center who plays a physical game. Definitely not a surprise to see Philly go with a center here, considering they went with a winger in Porter Martone with their first pick in the first round, but it was a bit of a surprise to see Nesbitt go this high. Moving on now to the 13th overall pick, the Red Wings went with winger Carter Bear out of the WHL. I really thought they were going to go with a defenseman here, figured it might be Jackson Smith, but I'm actually really happy they elected to go with a forward, as there's definitely a big need in the organization for goal scoring, and Carter Bear had 40 goals this season for the Silvertips in just 56 games. I think this was a pretty solid pick. 14th overall is where Jackson Smith ended up going, as the Blue Jackets selected him. He's a big, smooth skating defenseman who put up pretty solid point totals in the WHL this season with 54 in 68 games. He projects to be a pretty solid two-way defender. 14th overall, the Canucks went with centerman Braden Coots from the Seattle Thunderbirds. This one felt like a bit of a reach, but obviously he's a player Vancouver really liked. I'm sure he's somebody they scouted extensively throughout the season, considering he was just playing in Seattle, which is right there beneath Vancouver. Moving on now to the 15th and 16th overall picks, which we all kind of figured the Islanders were going to try to package together to try and move up in the top 10, but that is not what ended up happening. They actually used both of these picks, and I actually think they got pretty phenomenal value with both of these picks. As 16th overall, they selected Victor Eklund, who is the younger brother of William Eklund. A bit undersized, but he is a tenacious player who protects the puck very well. I wouldn't have been surprised at all if he was a top 10 pick, so I think the Islanders have to be pretty happy with the fact he fell into their lap 16th overall. And with the 17th overall pick, they went with defenseman Kashawn Aitchison, who is just an electric player. He's a big defenseman with a booming shot. He scored 26 goals in 64 games this season for the Barrie Colts. He's physical, is a lethal open ice hitter, and is somebody that I think is going to become a fan favorite very quickly for the Islanders. With the 18th overall pick, the Calgary Flames went with Cole Rushney. Also think they got pretty good value here. He is a dynamic playmaker, had 92 points in 62 games for Victoria in the WHL this season. 19th overall, the Blues went with winger Justin Carboneau, who had a really strong season in the queue, 46 goals, 89 points in 62 games. He's a great skater with a lethal shot, and he's got some size as well. I think Carboneau has all the makings of being a future 20 goal scorer in the NHL for the Blues. 20th overall, the Blue Jackets selected the first goaltender of the entire draft, Pyotr Andrianov. I'd be lying if I said I was familiar with his game. Solid numbers in the MHL though, over in Russia this season. Probably not a guy we're going to see over in the NHL for at least like 5, 6, maybe even 7 years. But, you know, he's a draft and stash kind of guy. Maybe he'll turn out to be the next Shesterkin or Sorokin. Who knows? 21st overall, the Nashville Predators went with left shot defenseman Cam Reed, who was the highest scoring defenseman this season on the Kitchener Rangers with 54 points in 67 games. 22nd overall, the Penguins went with Bill Zonin, who is a big winger with a pretty well-rounded offensive game. He put up big point totals in the queue this season with 83 in 64 games. With the 23rd overall pick, the Ottawa Senators went with right shot defenseman Logan Hensler out of the University of Wisconsin. Doesn't seem to be a whole lot of offensive upside there, but people rave about his defensive game, so hopefully he turns out to be a pretty solid shutdown defenseman one day for the Senators. Moving on now to the 24th overall pick, the Pittsburgh Penguins selected William Horkoff, who is the son of Sean Horkoff, who was obviously a longtime NHLer and is now a member of the Red Wings front office. He's a player the Penguins obviously really like because they actually traded up to get this pick. He's a player who does a lot of the little things well. He's physical, good defensively, forechecks well, and if he can even become 80% of the player his dad was in his prime, I think the Penguins will be thrilled. 25th overall, the Blackhawks went with Vaclav Nestrasel. Not really a player I'm all that familiar with. He is a huge winger, played in the USHL this past season. 26th overall, the Predators went with Riker Lee, who is another winger who played in the USHL this past season. 27th overall, the Washington Capitals went with winger Lyndon Lakovic, who was well over a point per game in the WHL for Moose Jaw this season. 28th overall, the Jets selected left shot defenseman Sacha Boumedienne out of Boston University. Hopefully I didn't just butcher his name there. He was actually the youngest player in the NCAA this past season, and he had an unbelievable showing when he represented Sweden at the U18 World Championships, as he actually broke the single tournament scoring record for a defenseman and was named the tournament's best defenseman, so a lot to like there. 29th overall, the Blackhawks selected Mason West, who is a huge right shot center out of the USHL. 30th overall, the Sharks selected the second and final goaltender of the first round, Joshua Ravensbergen. Good size and athleticism, and was 33, 13, and 4 for Prince George in the WHL this season. 31st overall, the LA Kings went with right shot defenseman Henry Brustevich, who had 42 points in 67 games for the London Knights in the OHL. And finally, closing out the first round with the pick they got from the Matthew Tkachuk trade, the Calgary Flames select Colin Potter. He finished the season with 22 points in 35 games for Arizona State University. He's a bit undersized, but the skill is definitely there. So those are all the picks that were made in the 2025 NHL Draft so far. Now I want to give you guys my thoughts on a trade that happened before the draft started, a little bit after the Noah Dobson trade, and the full details of this trade are Miles Wood and Charlie Coyle to the Blue Jackets in exchange for a 2025 third-round pick, a conditional 2027 second-round pick, and prospect Gavin Brindley. Not gonna lie, I was flabbergasted when I seen this trade, and I still don't really like this at all for the Blue Jackets, especially with no salary retention here. I honestly thought Miles Wood is the kind of guy that Colorado would have probably had to attach a pick or a prospect to just to entice a team to take on the remainder of his contract. But not only did they not have to do that, they actually get some pretty decent assets back here for Wood and Charlie Coyle, along with clearing up $7.75 million in cap, which will allow them to be a lot more aggressive in free agency now. In my opinion, this was a fantastic deal for the Avalanche. For Columbus, you kind of see where they're coming from. Obviously, they want to build off of the season that they just had, where they were right there in the thick of the playoff race right up until the end of the season. But I don't really think adding guys like Coyle and Miles Wood moves the needle all that much for the Blue Jackets. Sure, it adds some depth and veteran presence to their bottom six, but to me this really just felt like an overpay and not a great usage of their cap space. It kind of feels like maybe this was a desperation move to improve the roster right away by the Blue Jackets after missing out on Noah Dobson, as it was reported that Columbus was one of the final two teams in the Noah Dobson sweepstakes along with Montreal, who obviously ended up landing him. So those are my thoughts on the first round of the 2025 NHL Draft. All in all, a bit of a snooze fest, hoping for some more chaos tomorrow, but as always, I want to know what you guys are thinking, so be sure to sound off down below in the comments. How do you think your team did tonight? If you made it all this way to the end of the video and you ended up enjoying yourself, please remember to leave a like. It's the best way to let me know that you enjoyed, and it does actually help out the videos a ton. And most importantly, if this was your first time checking out the channel and you want more NHL content just like this all year round, be sure to hit that subscribe button, and I will talk to you all again soon.